Hey, Brook Scholars, welcome back to Remote Learning with me, Mr. Scott. Happy Tuesday. Really particularly excited about today's work because I can tell you straight away that this is a nonfiction text. For that, I should say, we are going to do a very particular kind of work. Today, we are going to be reviewing all of the wonderful work that we used to do with annotating. You remember what annotation is? Annotations when we're annotating? Do you? That's right. That's when you're reading a nonfiction text and you take little notes. And the way that we're going to do that today is we're going to be doing notes for four notes in total. Why four? Well, I'll tell you. Because this particular article has four different sections. It starts, of course, with the introduction. But then when we move on to the second page, you'll notice that there are three more headings. So for each of these sections, we're going to stop and think about what we've learned, and we're going to write ourselves a little note. This is the best possible thing to do when you're reading nonfiction because it helps you to stop and think as you are reading. So by the time we get to the end of this, we'll be able to use our notes that we wrote down to help us remember all of the things that we've learned from this nonfiction text. So if you've been watching these videos and you haven't had a pencil and paper, that's fine, but I need you to go and get a pencil and a paper for today's assignment. I need you to do this with me right now, okay? Off you go. Don't worry, I'll wait. Got it? Ready? Okay, excellent. So maybe this paper could even be used as part of your exit ticket, all right? So to begin with, we're going to get started by doing what we usually do, and that is to put our name at the top, date, title, and then I'll show you along the way, you know, exactly what we should be doing on the paper. So, okay, so we'll start with our name. That's going to go top left, of course. Mr. Scott, today's date is the 14th, so that would be 4/14/20. And then we have the title. Now, this is quite a long title, so I recommend starting it really, really close to the side. I know it's supposed to be centered and it's supposed to be at the top, but there's a lot of going on here. The title of this particular article is called Mrs. Baird, and I'm guessing that's her. Hi, Mrs. Baird. And a lifetime, all one word, compound word there, two words that can stand alone, but together they work to give a new word of fresh bread. Oh, yes. Friends, if you don't know, I love bread. I love all types of different kinds of bread, and bread is going to be a big part of today's reading. I've underlined mine, and so it's now looking a little bit like this. Now, just like when you take a picture on Seesaw, I'm trying to fit all of it onto the page. I realize that most of the page is blank, but there we go. Name, date, and title. We're ready. All right. So the first section, as I said, is the introduction. When we read the introduction of a nonfiction text, we should be thinking certain things. First of all, we should use the title to help us. Mrs. Baird. Who is she? I don't know. And then it says a lifetime of fresh bread. So this woman and bread. It's not much to go on, is it? Okay, so as we're thinking about the introduction, be thinking and asking yourself this. What is the main topic? What is this article all about? We'll need that in our notes. So let's read the introduction, and then after we've read the introduction, we'll be ready to take our first annotation together. Very exciting. Here we go. Should start with the title, Mr. Scott. Mrs. Baird and a lifetime of fresh bread. Yummy. Many people agree that there is nothing better than the smell of fresh baked bread. Me too. People have enjoyed eating bread for thousands of years, but bread has not always been easy to get. It was only during the past 100 years that bread had been sold at grocery stores. Before that time, people made their own bread or bought it from people they knew. In the early 1900s, a woman in Fort Worth, Texas, named Ninia Lila Baird was one of those people. Mrs. Baird enjoyed baking cakes and pies to give to her neighbors and friends. Most of all, she loved to bake bread. Mrs. Baird's husband owned a restaurant in Fort Worth. Since so many people loved Mrs. Baird's baked goods, the restaurant began selling them to customers. Mrs. Baird worked hard each day to make sure there was enough bread for everyone who wanted some. While baking bread for the restaurant, Mrs. Baird also took care of her 8 children. When her husband fell ill and could not work anymore, Mrs. Baird continued to sell her baked goods so that she could provide for her family. She started a business and called it Mrs. Baird's Bread. All right, well, let's stop there before we go on to the next page and the next section. Okay, so what is the main topic of this article? Right. It is the life of Nina Lila Baird. And what's special about her? Well, it definitely has something to do with bread, right? Now, it's not easy taking all of that information, taking all of what we've just learned from those first 3 paragraphs and putting it into one sentence, but we can do this. What was she doing? What's a good verb? Well, she was baking bread, but she wasn't just baking bread. At the end there, it said that was how she was earning money. That was her job. That was how she was supporting her family. Okay, so we've got 3 ideas. We've got Mrs. Baird, baking bread, and why she's doing it. Who, what, why. Those are the kind of 3 parts to the sentence that we're going to write. Now, for this, I'm actually going to give myself a little heading at the top of the page. And then just underneath the introduction, I'm going to write a complete sentence that explains all 3 of those things. Who, what, why. Who? Mrs. Baird. Now, what about Mrs. Baird? Oh, she was baking bread, but I also want to say that she was selling the bread. It started off, she just liked to do it, and then it became really, really popular, right? So, I'm going to use 2 verbs at the beginning of my predicate for this sentence. I'm going to say Mrs. Baird baked and sold. I mean, you and I could go in our kitchen right now, we could make some bread, but 100 years from now, people aren't going to be writing about that. One day, Mr. Scott went and he baked bread in his kitchen. No, it's all about the fact that it was so popular that she could sell it and earn lots of money. Mrs. Baird baked and sold bread. Why? That's what she did, but why was she doing it? To support her family. It wasn't just for fun, it was a job, and she took it very, very seriously. It mentioned at least once in there that she worked very hard at this. Here it is. Now, if it's helpful, I'll put it here for a minute, but if you need to pause the video right now, you can copy that down. That's fine. Today, we're just going to be copying it down. We'll have at least one more nonfiction text that we'll do this week. And then you're going to be all on your own. I can't wait to read your own. Okay, so let's think about what we did there. We had to read through everything that we learned in the introduction, and then we had to come up with one sentence that explained everything that we learned. So we started with the subject, and the subject was Mrs. Baird. That's what this is all about. She is the subject of our sentence. She is the main topic. And then we went on and we found some good verbs. We found baked and sold bread, and then we gave the why. Why was she doing it? To support her family. This was the only means of income that was coming into the family. This was how they made their money. Good stuff. Okay, now the next one is called a family affair. So maybe we're going to learn more about this family of hers in this section. You guessed it. I am putting another heading. I'm copying that down. I'm also making sure that I'm spelling each and every one of those words correctly. A-F-F-A-I-R. I'm going to underline this new heading. So now it looks like that. All right. Only 2 paragraphs in this section. Let's read it, see what it's all about, stop and think about a great sentence that can help us remember all of the things that we've learned. A family affair. As Mrs. Baird's children grew older, they helped with the business. Mrs. Baird did the baking. She baked all day because she could fit only a few loaves of bread at a time in her wood-burning stove. Her oldest sons walked to the homes of the customers and delivered the baked goods. Soon, Mrs. Baird's baked goods were so popular that her sons needed a faster way to deliver them. They began to use their bicycles. Even more people ordered from Mrs. Baird. She had to find a way to bake more products at one time. So let's stop and think about this. Okay, so this section is about Mrs. Baird, but it's also about her family. So what were they doing? Well, they were delivering all of the products. Why? Well, they were delivering the products to the customers. And the why is because the bread was getting so popular that everyone was buying it. So let's begin our sentence. The subject, Mrs. Baird's family. So what were they doing? Well, they were helping her, right? They were helping. Okay, Mrs. Baird's family helped her deliver the bread. Let's throw a because in there, shall we? Remember I said we were going to have the third part of the sentence would be the why, so let's use the word because. Why? Well, because. B-E-C-A-U-S-E. Because. Because her baked goods were so popular. Ooh, I'm so popular. Mrs. Baird's family helped her deliver the bread because her baked goods were so popular. Now, if you need to pause the video here to copy that down, please do. I've tried to use my best handwriting, but it's not always been as it should be, so I'll try and work on that. I'm sure yours is going to look even better than mine. All right, so we need to move on. What's the next one? Expanding the business. Expanding. Ooh, it reminds me of the expanding that you guys need to do when you put your image up, your photo that you take of the work that you do. Remember to stretch it out. Okay, go to the corners, stretch it out, make it huge. Make it not just a little bit bigger, make it the biggest that it can be. All right. Next one, expanding the business. Expanding means getting bigger, right? And then we know that business is the job. Mrs. Baird's job, the business, is all about baking and selling bread. So if you expand the business, what does that mean? I think it might build on this idea of being even more popular. Here we go, friends. Expanding the business. In 1915, Mrs. Baird purchased a used oven from a hotel. The oven cost $75, but Mrs. Baird was able to buy it. Mrs. Baird. Sorry. But Mrs. Baird was able to pay only $25 in cash. Luckily, she was permitted to pay the rest of the amount she owed by providing bread and rolls to the hotel. Mrs. Baird kept her new oven in a small building in her backyard. This oven could bake up to 40 loaves at one time. The more bread Mrs. Baird made, the more bread she sold. This meant that more bread also had to be delivered. Delivering goods by bicycle was no longer practical, so the brothers began using the family wagon, which could hold many loaves of bread. The family horse pulled the wagon right up to the customers' homes. This faster delivery method allowed the family to earn more money. In 1917, Mrs. Baird bought a car. The family removed the seats from the back and filled the space with baked goods. They painted a sign on the side of the car that read, "Eat more Mrs. Baird's bread." Delivering by car meant that even more people could enjoy Mrs. Baird's bread. Actually, well, now that we're ready for our annotation, I think that line right there is going to be particularly important. Mrs. Baird's bread. Now, what happened? Well, her bread was becoming so popular that she had to improve the way that she made it by buying the oven and by the way that it was delivered by actually buying a car, taking all the seats out, and putting all the bread in there. Wow. Okay. So, topic. What is our topic here? We're going to say that last line right there, Mrs. Baird's bread. Go ahead and write that down now. Oops, got my S. Mrs. Baird's bread. There. Now, what about it? Well, it was becoming really, really popular. Mrs. Baird's bread became so popular that what? That why? Okay, it was becoming popular, so what else was having to happen? Well, it became so popular that the family needed new ways to bake and deliver it. I'm going to throw an exclamation point on there. Longer sentence this time. I get that. Thank you for all your hard work. And there we go. And again, if you need to pause the video, go ahead and do that right now. It says, Mrs. Baird's bread became so popular that the family needed new ways to bake and deliver it. Well, my friends, we've come to the end. We've got one more to go here. There we can see a loaf of Mrs. Baird's bread. Yummy. A century later. Go ahead and copy that heading down. A century. Now, a century means how long? Do you remember? Century. It's got that prefix cent on it. 100. That's absolutely right. Century is 100. In this case, 100 years, right? There we go. A century later. We're ready for it. Here we go. Today, the people who work at Mrs. Baird's bakeries are just as proud of their bread as Mrs. Baird was. Mrs. Baird's bakeries operate 4 factories across the state of Texas. These large bakeries are located in Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, and Lubbock. Hundreds of school children visit the Fort Worth and Houston bakeries on field trips each year. Wow. At the end of the tour, everyone receives a warm slice of fresh bread. Yum! Oh my goodness. So a century later, well, let's use that idea. So it's 100 years after Mrs. Baird, who so sadly is no longer with us. But the bread is still so popular, and they still have 4 factories that work, and that's a lot. So still very, very popular. Okay, a century later. So let's think about what we're talking about here. We're talking about Mrs. Baird, we're talking about her bread, and we're talking about the fact that it's 100 years later. So, what can we say? Mrs. Baird's bread what about it? It is still very popular. People love it. They buy it, they eat it. Yummy. They want more. Mrs. Baird's bread is still popular today. I'm thinking about the factories too, though, right? Because they've got the factories. They even told us where those factories are, the cities in Texas. And then they went on to say that children go to the factories and actually have big visits. Okay. Mrs. Baird's bread is still popular today. And the 4 factories are very busy. Okay, let me see. Oh, hang on. Whoa, 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 whoa. You gotta work with it. There we go. Mrs. Baird's bread is still popular today, and the 4 factories are very busy. Got it. Again, if you need to pause, that's okay. You can just pause and then copy it down. Goodness gracious me. Now look at this. Look at all of that wonderful work that we have put together here. Oh my goodness. Excellent. Now, I don't have to just think, ooh, what did I learn in that part? Or have to go back and try and find my evidence. I've got everything I need right here. This is now a great map, if you will, to understanding the entire article. Let's read it. Introduction. Mrs. Baird baked and sold bread to support her family. So I remember that she was starting off making it. Yeah, this is coming back to me now. And she was just making it for fun, but it was really popular. And so she sold it in her husband's restaurant, but then he got sick. And so the restaurant had to close. I think that was what it said. And then so she starts to sell it and make money. A family affair. Mrs. Baird's family helped her deliver the bread because her baked goods were so popular. Okay, so then she realizes I got to start making money. People really like this bread. I can start to sell it. And then her sons stepped up and they were like, "We can deliver for you, mom." And so they start delivering it and they deliver on foot. But then that wasn't fast enough. So then I think they got on their bicycles and then that was working. Next section, expanding the business. Mrs. Baird's bread became so popular that the family needed new ways to bake and deliver it. Oh yeah, because she only had that wood burning stove, which is not a very big thing. She could only bake 2 loaves of her bread in that stove. And that's not nearly enough. 2 loaves, not when it's becoming that popular. So she went to a hotel and she bought a brand new oven and she started using that oven to make more bread. I think it could make 40 loaves, which is a big step up from 2 loaves. But then, as we wrote down here, not just that, but they needed a new way to deliver it. So at first, they got the wagon, the family wagon, and they hitched up the horse and they went out and they sold all the bread and delivered it. But then, even that wasn't fast enough because it was still gaining in popularity. So they actually needed to buy a car, and then they took the seats out of the back, which I find to be really funny. And then they loaded up this car with bread and went off and delivered it. And finally, a century later, Mrs. Baird's bread is still popular today, and the 4 factories are very, very busy. That's right. We're down in Texas. We've got the 4 factories. So busy, in fact, that like school kids go to the factory and they get a slice of bread. Yum. Incredible, my friends. Again, look at all that hard work and careful thinking that we put into this article. I am definitely feeling really confident going into answering these questions. And that is your job right now. Down here at the bottom, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 multiple choice questions, and then 2 short answer questions. If you want, we filled up so much space on this. You know what you can do? You could just turn that over and just do the answers on the back, or if you could fit it on the front down at the bottom, that's absolutely fine. As always, I can't wait to see the work that you do, choosing your answers and then writing them down. Again, I would follow that same thing. Yes, that's what I'm expecting. So multiple choice here on the side and then your 2 short answers. Make sure that you're answering those short answer questions as well as the multiple choice, please. Teachers cannot wait to see all of the wonderful work that you post on Seesaw. So get stuck right in, my friends. I will see you tomorrow. Thank you for helping me with my annotations. Until tomorrow, this is Mr. Scott saying bye.